Story. The boys had finally stopped arguing. The reason was the beast that stood in front of them. Zoro stood wide-eyed, in awe, and stared down at the broken blade in his hand. How did it? He stuttered. Sanji was beside him looking at the spot where Zoro had struck the snake. There wasn't even a scratch. Despite the boys' mutual hatred for each other, Sanji wasn't stupid enough to dismiss the strength of the swordsman. That snake wasn't normal. The speakers in the roof crackled on. "Hey boys," came the little girl's voice. "This is Angel. She is a very special friend of ours here and a very important part of the game. We don't always pull her out if the team is already struggling, but you guys seem capable. I will warn you that your attacks won't work on her, although it would appear you have already noticed that." So, like I said at the beginning, the rules are simple. Survive until your captain gets back. The radio switched off and the snake lunged towards the two. In a panic, they both dived opposite ways and ended up crashing into each other. The two only just managed to scramble out of the way of the snake. "What the fuck are you playing at, shitty cook? Are you trying to get us both killed? You bastard. Watch where you're going." The two ran as the snake launched yet another attack. "Shit," Zoro muttered. "Whatever you're doing, hurry it up, Luffy." The little boy had dropped Robin's group off with a group of 3 before disappearing. There was a middle-aged man and woman, and a teenage girl, younger than Robin. "You 3 will be staying here for the night," the man said, smiling. "Your friends are in a separate hotel room, but you will meet with them tomorrow." "All right," Robin agreed. They followed the 3 others into the hotel and up the many flights of stairs. The building was pretty flash, and more modern than Robin would have expected considering it was in such an odd town. "Here we are," the girl said, stopping in a hallway containing 3 doors. "You may each take your pick of rooms. Feel free to use any of the facilities, including the food in the fridge and clothes in the cupboard. I will be back to collect you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock for the beginning of your captain's phase of the game. I would appreciate it if you could dress and be ready to go before then. As for your outfit, wear something flashy. The captain's phase is something we consider pretty big in this area." With that, she turned and left. The other 2 took up posts at the end of the corridor. Usopp and Chopper gawped at them while Robin got first dibs of rooms. Nami sat on her bed, eating her massive meal of roast vegetables and chicken. She swallowed her last mouthful and sighed, standing and walking towards the door with her plate. Just as she reached it, someone knocked on the door. Nami froze, surprised. "Come in," she called. The door swung open and a woman stood in the doorway. Behind her was a trolley laden with desserts. She took Nami's plates and pushed the next course into the room. Nami was shocked at the quality of their treatment, and wondered whether her captain was being treated the same way. "Tea, thanks." Nami stuttered as the girl turned and bowed, leaving her with her meal. "Some service," Nami muttered, closing her door and beginning her delicious pudding. The poor cooks had been streaming in and out of Luffy's room for hours. No matter how much they cooked, he devoured it in seconds. They had switched their focus from quality to quantity, but they were still struggling. "Who the hell feeds this guy?" one of the cooks muttered, thinking he was out of the captain's earshot. "That would be Sanji. He's a great cook, but he always gives the girls more than me," Luffy said, mouth full of everything he could fit in it. Then he grinned, swallowing. "You shipped him off someplace else though. Say, do any of you know what he and Zoro are doing?" The cooks promptly paled and shook their heads. Of course, they knew exactly where he was, but they weren't permitted to share that information with the captain. Luffy, being Luffy, completely ignored their hardly plausible lie and turned his attention back to his food, shrugging. "Promoted stories. You'll also like." The Rising Moon. One Piece. 2.1K 200. 2 years had passed since the War of the Best, along with the Straw Hat being sent flying from Sabayati Archipelago due to the former warlord, Kuma. With the 2 years P. Mysterious Girl on the Straw Hat Ship 1. 8.2K 437. YN, a kind, lovely and beautiful girl who died while saving puppy god transmigrat into world of pirates. She also have unique power, as long as she wish any anime power. A Second Chance One Piece fanfiction. 385K 8.8K. Complete. Finally, after years of fighting, Monkey D. Luffy arrives at Lawtail and becomes Pirate King. But, he has lost a lot to get here. All of his friends are Dia. Isaac the Sky Boy. 2.8K 86. Open HoloLens bracket Roronoa Zoro X self-insert OC, One Piece Netflix adaptation, close HoloLens bracket, an alternate version of Enquat, the Isekod Pirate Enquat, based on the One Piece live action. Let me help you. A Luffy x Nami fanfic. 209K 2.5K. After Luffy's battle with Doflamingo at Dressrosa, Luffy is now once again reunited with Sabo. Reuniting with Sabo somehow made Luffy remember about Ace and Hadarioke. Gomen, Captain. 42.7K 1.3K. Book 1. No regrets, right? It's been 2 years since the Battle of Marineford. 2 years since the Straw Hats were separated. After taking off from Amazon Lily with Law. The Heart and Soul of Monkey D. Luffy. 1P. 1.4K 61. This story follows Luffy after a fateful encounter with a seemingly ordinary 18-year-old girl named Arya. Tragic circumstances lead to Arya joining Luffy's ragtag pirate. When he had finally exhausted his bottomless stomach and half of the cooks, who were now scattered around the kitchen, he sighed and fell back onto his bed, asleep. Through the cameras the man watched, chuckling. My, he grinned, raising an eyebrow. Isn't this guy interesting? Yes, sir. The little girl chimed. Her brother nodded beside her. Sanji and Zoro were still running. The snake was still chasing them. For a while, they had continued to argue. At this point, neither of them had the energy. What the hell are we going to do with this snake? Zoro panted. No idea, Sanji replied, but I'm getting tired. If we don't figure out how to shake this thing, we're screwed. Zoro nodded, throwing a look over his shoulder. Suddenly, he turned back to Sanji. I've got an idea, but it's desperate, he said. Sanji looked at him. Let's hear it. We have to let it eat us, Zoro said matter-of-factly. Sanji stared at him in silence, his face slowly contorting from one of curiosity to one of rage. Moron, if you're gonna get my hopes up at least give me results. I warned you that it was desperate. Zoro replied. The two stopped to face each other. Hear me out, Zoro continued, as if you're really worth listening to. Sanji muttered. I can't hear you, you shitty cook. If you're going to talk shit about me, do it to my face so I can beat the crap out of you. As if you could beat me, you sorry excuse for a pirate. Zoro opened his mouth to retaliate, but was beaten by the snake. The two dived out of the way as the beast dove towards them. They both scrambled to their feet and continued to run. Anyway, the stupid thing has rock-hard scales, and it's so big it would just swallow us whole. Sanji stared up at the swordsman, comprehension dawning on his face. Actually, swordsman, he said. That might work. Robin checked out her room. Not bad. Her cupboard was completely filled with casual clothes as well as flasher outfits. She pulled the curtains open and pushed open the window, inhaling the fresh air. Decent view. Sweet. She locked her door and headed into the bathroom to have a shower. From what she could hear, the others were fighting over the other two rooms. She chuckled. Of course they were. As she sunk under the surface of the tub-like bath, Robin wondered what was going on with the others. She had a strange feeling something interesting would come of Nami and Luffy's challenge. From what she had gathered, the other two were alive. She wasn't sure what to make of the whole Angel the Snake thing. But oh well, nothing she could do about it. Nami had been trying to get back to the garden for the rest of the afternoon, but with no luck. After dessert, she had been taken for a massage. That had lasted 2 hours, and after she was advised to go to bed. She had listened to the receding footsteps and noticed that they hadn't gone very far. Her room was guarded. She wasn't sure whether it was to keep others out, or to keep her in. Knowing it would be useless to go, she knew there was nothing more she could do for her captain. She sighed, stripping down and crawling into bed. The room was amazingly comfortable. The bedding was all silk, and the mattress was much nicer than the ones in her and Robin's cabin. Still, she couldn't sleep. She wasn't too worried, since it was becoming a thing, and she had slept earlier on the way there, but there was the same nagging feeling on her consciousness, same as ever. The constant need to be near her captain. She had convinced herself that it was only because she was worried about him, as she would be any member of the crew under his circumstances. But she knew there was more to it. Finally, she decided it might be best to address the issue. She went over many things in her mind. First, back as far as she could remember. The first time she saw the captain. Right back, when she had framed him for stealing a buggy's sea chart. No, it had been before that. Had he? Had he been in that restaurant back at Marine Base? Come to think of it, hadn't there been a scene there because some guy had punched a Marine, and that couldn't have been. Nami gasped in shock as she realized that that man had been her captain. She had seen him there, and in the base as well. He was the one causing all the rakus. And hadn't Zoro been there as well? Yeah, Zoro had been captured by the Marines. Had Luffy shown up to save him, or recruit him? It all made sense now, but there was something else. Way back when she was on that cruise, and they had been raided by pirates who were defeated by a boy. Luffy again, and she had met eyes with him as she escaped. No way, had he really already helped her before she knew who he was? How if she had known that man would one day be her captain? Nami realized she had got off topic. She sighed and got out of bed and headed over the window. As she reached it, a rock came soaring up and smacked into the pane. Nami jumped back in shock. Then she ran forwards, throwing the window open to see who it was. Sure enough, her beaming captain stood in the courtyard, grinning up at her. She couldn't help but crack a grin as he stretched his arms out and stepped back. Nami's grin faltered and faded as she realized what would happen when her captain launched himself up. He would come flying through the window and crash right into her. But she was too late. The blur came through the window faster than she could react and crashed right into her. Whoa, I jumped too far, Luffy cried as he collided with Nami. She was thrown backwards into the floor and he landed on top of her. He caught himself on his elbows and chuckled. My bad, he chuckled. Despite everything, Nami could not bring herself to be mad. She chuckled along with him. Mrs., is everything all right in there? The guard outside the door asked. Nami panicked, going bright red and pushing her captain off. Yeah, sorry, she replied. She turned to Luffy and raised a finger to her lips, shushing him. He grinned and nodded from where he was sprawled on the floor. Nami sighed and offered him a hand. He took it and allowed her to help him up. Sorry about that, he said, raising a hand to the back of his head. Nami waved him off. Don't worry about it. How did you know this was my room? She asked, suddenly curious. Luffy just shrugged. He seemed slightly red, and kept his gaze on the window. Nami wondered why. Suddenly she became aware of her lack of clothing and went bright red. Panicking, she ran into the bathroom, locking the door behind her. Moron. How the hell had she forgotten? She slid down the door. What the hell was she supposed to do now? She couldn't go back out there and face her captain, and she had left her towel outside, meaning she didn't even have anything to wear. One sound reached her through her panic. Her captain was cracking up in the other room. She sighed, relieved. At least he wasn't taking it too seriously. She listened as he approached the door and knocked gently. She stood up and took a deep breath, opening a crack and peering through the gap. Her captain offered her her clothes, still grinning like a moron. She snatched them off him and slammed the door shut. She pulled them on hurriedly, composing herself. She glanced in the mirror and realized how red she still was. She was practically glowing. Knowing there was nothing else she could do, she steeled herself to go back outside. She was just glad it was someone like her captain who never really took anything seriously. He would just find it funny. She took another deep breath and opened the door. Sorry about that, she said, unable to meet her captain's gaze. He was sitting on her bed, waiting for her to come out. Hearing this, he just chuckled. Don't worry about it. How are you liking this place? Pretty great, huh? He asked. Nami saw the chance to change the subject and grinned, nodding. She sat down beside her captain, although not too close, and explained her service. He had had a pretty similar experience. Nami eventually remembered her earlier revelation. Oh, Luffy, I just realized that that time with the buggy wasn't the first time we'd met. She said. Luffy looked curious. Really? He asked. Yeah, I think so, she replied, turning to face him, cross-legged. He spun around to meet her gaze. You remember ages ago when there was that massive whirlpool? We've been through a lot of whirlpools, Luffy pointed out. Nami realized that she was going to need to be much more specific. In the East Blue, if I'm correct, I don't think you had Zoro yet. And I think you ended up on a cruise boat. Luffy's eyes lit up with recognition. Oh yeah, I know one, he exclaimed. Nami hurriedly shushed him, remembering the guards outside. That's the one I got caught in when I had just left my island, he said in a whisper. Nami nodded, now even more certain she was right. And we were attacked by pirates. Yeah, that big fat lady, Luffy agreed. Nami nodded. While she was attacking the cruise boat, I snuck onto her own ship and robbed her. Name explained. Luffy grinned. Really? He whispered, looking as childish as ever. Nami nodded. And while I was robbing them, some kid defeated the captain. This time, Luffy nodded. Yeah, that was me, he admitted. So we were on the same boat then, huh? What a coincidence. It's a coincidence, you moron. Nami sighed. But yes, and that's not all. I ran off in a boat as the Marines arrived, and just before I left, another boat hit the water. I think you were in that boat. Am I right? Realization filled Luffy. Oh yeah, I remember now, it was you I saw in that boat, wasn't it? Nami nodded, excited. Who was that other kid? She asked. Luffy's face, as usual, betrayed his every emotion. That was Kobe. He explained, a smile spreading over his face. He was the fat lady's cabin boy, but he wanted to be a Marine, so he ran away with me. And the two of you ended up in Marine Base City? Nami asked. Luffy looked confused. Yeah, how did you know that? He asked. I did as well. She explained. And you found Zoro there and attacked the son of the Marine captain while I was trying to enjoy a peaceful meal, she said with a teasing tone. Luffy went wide-eyed in surprise. You were there as well? He asked, amazed. Nami nodded. I tried to steal the chart of the Grand Line while you were there, but I found out it was buggy. And sure enough, you were there too. I can assure you that was a complete accident. Luffy added, you see, got eaten by a bird, and then a cannon fell out of the sky and I ended up in the middle of your fight, which you then roped me into. He said. Nami nodded, confused. All right, she said. Anyway, it's crazy, right? Luffy grinned and nodded. Yeah. They both lapsed into silence. Eventually, Nami spoke. I wonder what the others are doing. Okay, you ready? Yeah. You had better not screw this up. As if I'm the problem here, Cook. Moron. Asshole. Crap. Go, go, go. Sanji dove forwards and Zoro took his chance. He jumped into Sanji's kick and allowed himself to be launched into the gaping maw of the beast. He was thrown so far into the stomach of the beast, the momentum drove him into the flesh on the inside. This was fortunate, because sitting just below Zoro was a massive river of acid. Zoro pulled out two of his swords and used them to keep himself upright. Meanwhile, poor Sanji was left trying desperately to avoid the flailing snake. At least he knew their pala would work, as whatever Zoro was doing was clearly causing it pain. He leapt out of range of the snake and grinned. Then the loudspeakers switched on. Wait! A panicked voice called. Please, don't hurt her. You guys win. You're free to go. This was followed by a high-pitched sound. Upon hearing it, the snake froze. Zoro, having heard the announcement, climbed out of its still open jaw. The pitch changed slightly and the snake turned, leaving the two of them alone. Well, that worked better than I expected, Zoro said, pulling off his acid-stained shirt which was slowly burning up. He had managed to avoid the worst of the stomach acid, so his skin was fine. Sanji nodded, ashamed to admit that something the swordsman came up with was better than something he could have thought of. Instead of arguing about it, he sighed, lighting another cigarette. Then he spoke. We should find the door. They said we were free to go, didn't they? Zoro nodded. I think the exit was this way, he said, turning to face the complete opposite direction. That's where not to go, you moron. Excuse me, are you challenging my sense of direction? Of course I am. Nobody in their right mind would follow you into the jungle. Their fight was, once again, broken up by the loudspeakers. We will be sending an escort in to pick you boys up. Please wait patiently for him to arrive. It instructed. The two huffed and turned away from each other, arms crossed. They both stalked off to separate trees where Zoro resumed his nap and Sanji resumed his fantasies about saving the girls. Robin, Usopp and Chopper had all been fed and tended to during the course of the afternoon. Chopper and Usopp played cards for a while in Usopp's cabin, but they went to bed fairly quickly. All of them were excited for the match in the morning. None of them knew what was going on, only Robin had broken the events down in her head. She noted the groups they had been split into. One was clearly the Brawl and she assumed her group was the Brain. For that reason, she assumed that the boys were off doing some kind of physical challenge. From what the instructors had told her about their challenge, she thought they might be doing something that involved them being trapped in a room with a giant snake. But that was just a guess. Knowing the two of them, no beast would be able to bring them too much strife, at least not overnight. And she doubted that this island would let them die. That would be too much wasted talent. What she wasn't sure about was her captain's group. Since they took a navigator, she assumed part of their challenge had already been completed, or was, perhaps, underway. That would mean that what she would be witnessing tomorrow would likely be to do with her captain. That was the one she wondered about as she tucked herself into bed and switched off her light. But she couldn't figure it out. Oh well, she muttered, and proceeded to fade into sleep. Nami and Luffy had been silent for a while. Luffy was sitting on the edge of the bed with Nami still beside him. She was slowly beginning to drift off, but didn't notice until she was already too far gone to get herself up instead. she allowed herself to fall onto her captain's shoulder. Luffy looked down at her, startled. Seeing her almost sleeping navigator, he chuckled softly and scooped her up, carrying her over to the side of the bed and gently tucking her under the covers. He then drew the curtain and took a seat on the couch opposite the bed, satisfying his boredom by watching his navigator's breathing slow. Just before she nodded off completely, she turned her head to look at her captain. Seeing him in the chair, she sighed and rolled over onto her back, pulling back the covers to allow him to jump in with her. Her brain was too clouded by sleep to think too much of it, but even so, as she started to wake back up, her cheeks began to glow red. Luckily, the room was too dark for her captain to notice. She watched as he slipped off his shoes and hat, and then, after a slight hesitation, his shirt. This made her go even redder, despite knowing that he obviously thought very little of it. Finally, he crawled in beside her, dropping down on the pillow and rolling over onto his side. Without thinking about it, Nami rolled as well so her head rested on his arm and her body was curled against his chest. Before either of them realized, they were asleep. The game master stared at the screen, his potato chip still frozen halfway to his mouth, which was hanging open. Holy crap! He muttered, eyes fixed on the scene folding out before him. He was rewatching the fight between the boys and Angel. He wasn't imagining it. The blonde kid really had kicked his companion into the snake's mouth, and it definitely was planned. These two were insane. Were they aware that one slip up in there would mean certain death? He shook his head. All around him, the screens were going dark as lights were turned off. He watched the three brains go to bed, and then a sound caught his attention. The captain had snuck out of the window and somehow chanced upon his navigator's room. He watched as the footage carried out, and as the boy flung himself into the window. He watched on as the two of them chatted away on the bed about some crazy coincidence and noticed the phrase, Buggy the Clown. To make things fair, the organization and the entire island had avoided wanted posters so that they did not know the power of the crew that came through their gates. It helped keep things interesting. But even so, the game master knew about Buggy from the East Blue, even if it was only because of the only map of the Grand Line being in his possession. And from what he heard, this boy had defeated him in a fight. That was mental. Just how strong was this group? He continued to watch as the girl drifted off and the captain tucked her into bed. How adorable, he commented, a small smile on his lips. He continued to watch as the girl offered the captain a spot in her bed, and as he pulled off his shirt. He was most intrigued by the scar on his chest. He was fairly sure he had seen the swordsman make a similar mark on some of the beasts. Was it possible the two had fought? And had the captain been able to survive an attack from the swordsman? The game master had watched how easily it had brought down several freakishly strong animals. Was it possible for a human to survive such an attack? His mind was drawn back to the room as the two curled up with each other. Not usual behavior for a navigator and her captain, he deducted. He called the little girl over. When you get a chance, could you ask one of the crew members about the relationship between these two? He asked. I find it fairly interesting. The girl nodded, turning back to her place beside her brother. Yes, the man muttered. Very interesting. Where stories live. Discover now.